letters or wrote and sent letters. So the author of Hebrews is actually kind of unknown. They speculate Paul, Luke, Priscilla. They even speculate that Barnabas or Timothy died because he was a close companion to Paul during all this time. There was thoughts that the person who wrote it was from Rome because the ending of Hebrews talks about an Italian, somebody from Italy. So they kind of, people that, study Hebrews, that this is kind of their analogy of Hebrews. So the letter of Hebrews was written by a Hebrew to the Hebrews to not act like Hebrews. That's basically the joke with it, or the known fact, I guess. It was commonly referred to as a letter, although it does not have the typical form of a letter. It ends like one, but begins like an essay or a sermon. No manner of greeting, so hence why it was lacking a letter kind of thing. What I got out of it is the Holy Spirit and God knows who wrote Hebrews. So, studying through, for me, I was trying to pinpoint who wrote Hebrews and why. But with not knowing who wrote Hebrews and a lot of speculations, it's like, God and the Holy Spirit knows who wrote Hebrews. Hebrews, the theme of it was absolute supremacy and sufficiency of Christ as revealed and as a mediator of God's grace. So the whole theme of Hebrews, this very in-depth letter that was written by, someone in that time frame, they really pinpointed, God's ultimate supremacy over everything. And then, how we get sufficient through Christ, and one of the topics is faith. The timeline, for all of this, Christ died, around 0, and, anything before was before Christ, and everything was after Christ. But there was a lot of turmoil after Christ had died and rose again, and there was a temple in Jerusalem that was destroyed. Based on the letter and the facts out of the letter, the author was, most likely after that event. And so during that event, there was someone that came into power, I think Nero. And so one of his objectives was to crucify, Jewish Christians. So a lot of the problems, kind of like there are today, was, they were trying to convert, people were trying to convert, the people that are being persecuted back to Judaism or back to a bunch of really in-depth Jewish systems. Because, and a lot of people were doing it because they wanted to avoid the persecution. So, history repeats itself, right? So, as you're reading this through, it's like, this has repeated itself a few times through modern history. So, right after Christ, there was already turmoil, there was already problems, there was already darkness, and so you can translate that to the now. So, for me, it's a lot of what was it like then? What was the scene? What was it about? What was God trying to do? Then how does that translate to now? Well, Hebrews, the whole theme of Hebrews really spells out what exactly is going on now. The author consistently uses Greek present tense when speaking of the temple and priestly activities. So, the destruction of the temple and, a lot of the Jewish customs and a lot of the ways that, the way they did things back then. What else? Yeah, there was a lot of Jewish Christians back then that were talking about merging with different Jewish sectors back then. So there was a lot of religious things happening. So, and I mean, basically, the target of Hebrews, the readers, the people reading Hebrews back then, and even for us now, I mean, it was telling a theme of no turning back, or no continue. Back then, it was no continuation of the Jewish system, the old way of things. And, the writer of Hebrews was also very knowledgeable about Old Testament stuff. So it was really bringing in, here was these old covenants, here was this stuff in the Old Testament that, Christ was born, he died, he rose again, and that this was, the way that we're going to do things moving forward. Not anything, from the past. It was kind of, to do away with the old Jewish system. God's people must now look only to Him, whose atoning death, resurrection, and ascension have opened the way into the true heavenly sanctuary of God's presence, which we've been talking about that collectively for a while. We're all in that sanctuary, right? So I kind of, got an overview of Hebrews, kind of a little better understanding of what a lot of the things with Hebrews, but then I was pinpointing to chapter 11. So the chapter 11, the whole book of Hebrews has given extensive evidence proving that Jesus and the new covenant, that he was brought about. Chapter 10 provides an additional warning about the danger of falling away from this truth. So, much like my life, I, get in before God, and then, it's a lot different now. Let's say when I was younger, you get in right standing with God, but at some point you would start to kind of fall away. I mean, that has been my life. I don't so much have that big of a problem as I did when I was younger, because I've grown up a little. I mean, I still, start to walk away. It's like, oh, wait. Let's get back over in this spot, because, it's a lot better. Those who have faith in contrast to those who fall back. So chapter 11 begins by clarifying the meaning of faith by giving examples of Old Testament figures. In chapter 12, the major theme was encouragement. So, here was the story of, talking about the dangers of falling back, but then here's the examples of, all these people in the Bible and what they did. And then, now we're going to encourage you into what we're talking about. So, for faith, because chapter 11 really talks in depth about, faith, and so faith is not blind. Half the verses in the book of Hebrews are dedicated to explaining reasons and evidence to accept the new covenant. Faith is not gullible or senseless. Godly faith is demonstrated by trust. So demonstrate means to give a practical example. So, in this journey, it kind of was looking at faith as, as we'll get further here, but as an ideal or a belief system. But then, demonstrating it is the actual activation of that faith. That trust is based on what we know of God, relying on Him for the things we do not know. Kind of like a lot of Melissa's lesson, a few weeks ago about the darkness. It was really starting to make a little more sense to me, about the darkness and operating in the darkness. but having the trust that, operating in the darkness and that we have a purpose to operate in the darkness. Faith looks forward for eternal perspective and produces obedience even in the face of hardship. So, much like this, whole chapter 11, by faith, Noah built the ship in the middle of dry land. So, if Noah came to God and said, hey, build a ship, I'd have a hard time with that, looking around and, there's clear skies, there's no rain. How do you activate that, He was warned about something he couldn't see and acted on what he was told. The result, his family was saved. His act of faith drew a sharp line between the evil of the unbelieving world and the rightness of the believing world. As a result, Noah became intimate with God. Faith relies on what we've seen of God and trust Him for the future. Faith relies on what we've seen of God and trust Him for the future. And kind of opening Hebrews 11, the very first thing kind of confirms that. And it says, and this is out of the Message, the fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, so, for me, kind of, plugging in a belief system, an ideal, there's facts, so I'm not discounting that, what faith is, I'm just bringing something else out of faith. Is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. The act of faith is what distinguished our ancestors, set them above the crowd. By faith, we see the world called into existence by God's word that we see created by what we don't see. So, God's kind of, the writer of this letter, obviously inspired by God, is opening up, that, this is the foundation, the faith, the belief system, the ideal, I'm finding for myself is very important. And sometimes, as a collective thing, for me, sometimes things get rattled because I get off the belief system. Or, everybody in this room has a unique belief system. And, we collectively have a unique belief system. So, looking at faith as a unique belief system in something that we can't see, but with the obvious proof that it's true and exists, So it kind of led me to, okay, here's chapter 11. Basically verse 3 through verse 31. Every sentence opens up with by faith or by an act of faith. So, me, I kind of get accused of being analytic, and, I have to analyze that sometimes, but I decided to analyze, the sentence, from a perspective of what, I'm not a language major by any means. I use words that I don't even mean half the time, and I have to carry around a dictionary to confirm, oh yeah, that's what that word means, and I used it out of total context. So, learning, like, oh, I got tools, I got the computer, I can break things down to get a better understanding that, kind of does correlate with what Hebrews is saying. So it isn't, it's like, hey, what's all this mean? And then, let's put it together. So, in sentences, there's always a subject, there's a meaning. So you write a sentence and there's different pieces to it and there's meanings to it. So a subject and, a verb, so that, action, there could be adjectives to describe, certain words in the sentence. And then, even nouns to person, place, or thing, and then what you get out of it is a sentence that makes sense. So not all the time do I make sentences that make sense by any means. So, bear with me on this. And what I did was found a website to print out the language structure, and I just did the whole chapter 11. So I kind of created a cheat sheet. But in a lot of this, by faith, by faith, and then it also says by an act of faith. And then it's a comma and a comma. So then, we could take any one of these really, and we could go into like Noah as a noun, and so I was kind of stopping myself from writing too much out because I can get too in depth. But faith is a noun. Faith here is a noun. Okay? So a noun is a person, place, thing, or an ideal. So, each one of these chapters with that beginning is kind of giving you the ideal or the belief of what's behind the example. And my example, which I don't know if it's in there, but it's David and Goliath. The example of David, is faith isn't what killed David. I mean, faith is the, biggest reason that conjured up where, the spot he's in. Because if it wasn't without the faith, he wouldn't have been in the spot he was in. So, he was, given a mustard seed of faith, and, he took that, and obviously he became stronger in his belief and, his direct contact with God. But, it was, the trust that he had in God is what killed David. Not the rock, not the faith. I mean, it's a beginning piece, but the most important thing I see is that it was his trust in God is what killed David. Goliath, sorry. And a lot of these examples, it follows that suit. The Noah example, it was his faith and his trust in God to build the boat, and that's what, got him through that part. So then I define a lot of these words. Faith, from the dictionary, is a belief and trust in loyalty to God. So, that being a noun became, I understood it a little better. A lot of times, for me, faith gets put in as a verb. And there is examples of faith being a verb in the Bible. I wasn't going to go into that because it got more complicated. But from Hebrews 11, the clear understanding that these are nouns. Another definition of faith is firm belief in something for which there is no proof. No proof. A noun, person, place, thing, ideal, belief. I looked into that. It's different from when I was younger. It was pretty simple what a noun is, and now a noun's a pretty, big explanation. But, the just, person, place, or thing. And then another definition of faith is complete trust. And then belief. Belief is a noun. So a belief, the definition of belief is a state or habit of mind in which trust or confidence is placed into some person or thing. So, putting trust into God is the belief, in this example, in this lesson. Trust. Trust is a verb. So a verb is defined as expresses an act, occurrence, or made of being. So it's action. Verb is, an action. So trusting is defined as a verb. So And the definition is assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. And I put in, that something or someone is God. So, having that assured reliance on everything that, is God is the definition of trust. Another definition is one in which confidence is placed. And then another definition is dependence on something future or contingent, so hope. So trust being, quite a bit of action pieces there. In Melissa's lesson, I don't know, there was just something about that, but, you kind of brought up about living in the darkness because of how bad the world we live in. And we are fighting against the things of the darkness and looking at the darkness as a different perspective in that separation. So, being in that spot, sort of, it kind of, the biggest thing I could grab a hold of was just, that trust in God, that actionable piece. Maybe going in the darkness, I have the faith to go into that, but then, I could be lacking the trust. Kind of like a roller coaster ride, I can relate to that. There's a lot of deep down the bottom of your toes to trust to get on that roller coaster. And I know it's a thrill. I'm still a thrill seeker at that point, only that. But then getting off of there and realizing, just trusting, all of it. I mean, I'm putting a lot of trust in God when I get on that roller coaster. There's no line. It's a simple roller coaster ride. There's many people that it does not faze them. Scott looking at me, laughing and waving, really didn't help. But there's a lot of trust put into that when you sit in that seat. The things I didn't realize is that trust relating to other areas of my life. So I started, kind of analyzing more, right? Computers. So computers are a lot like people, really. We have memory. Computers have memory. Some of us wish we had a memory upgrade. There's short-term memory, which is very relative to computers. Maybe because I worked in computers for years, I have relied on and trusted God in a lot of areas. Maybe not everything, but in a lot of things, you get in a pinch and it's like help me with this so there's proof for evidence there for me. Because there's things that have happened that I couldn't explain. But short-term memory is relative to a computer. We store long-term memories. In a computer, that's the hard drive. That's where everything gets stored. If you unplug power, everything stays there. So, relating to us, there's long-term memory. So, our processor, all of us have a different, unique processor, and some of them, process, way differently than others. Some have 2 cores, some have 4, some have, I've met people that there are those. So you can kind of relate to, that point. In computers, the technology, the processor, if it's really, really old, you could just imagine how slow at processing it does compared to something brand new. Nowadays, you got AI is a big thing, and AI is overcoming, the processing power. So now there's help in it. Okay. So when we, get on a device and get on the computer and get on the internet, you have to use your imagination now. So, if I'm looking at a screen and I'm looking at Facebook, and I'm going to go type a message and hit send. So for that piece to get to the other piece, it has to be broken down. It has to be broken down into pieces, which is much like ants. So ants have a colony, and it's deeply rooted, and they, if you dig one up, and if it's a big colony, it just blows your mind what ants can do. Ants can lift like 4 times their body weight, and there's a queen ant that oversees this. There's different categories of ants, kind of like bees too. There's a particular ant called the, it's a type of ant from Africa, and they may be in South America, but what they do is they formulate a path. They formulate a path, and some of the ants will stand on the outside and just stand there like an antenna or, a tripwire. And so all these other ants will be busy, traveling this freeway. Well, if something was to get closer to trigger that ant, all of a sudden there would be a swarm of ants attacking whatever was interrupting it. But the point of the Mufaso, I'll Google it. I can't think of it. I didn't write it down. But anyway, for information to get from one point to the other, it has to be broken down into ants, like ants. It goes across your wire, and then it ends up at the other end where the ants get translated, and it gets put back together to a view that you would understand. The behind the scenes of computers, the language is not what we see. The computer language is completely, zeros and ones and, digitally and, not to make this a boring thing, but, so behind the scenes, there's a lot happening as far as that computer. You can kind of, relate this a little bit to blood cells. There's blood cells that carry things throughout our body from point A to point B. So just another illustrative example. So if I have Facebook and I have my computer here and I have another computer over here, there is such a thing that's more in servers, but I'm just trying to keep this simple. But when you make a connection, there has to be a trust. And in computers, it's called transitive and intransitive trust. Another thing in that is a relationship. So this is, all in computer studies about, servers and domains as a relationship together, and this intransitive and transitive trust. Transitive trust is equal to, that is defined as can extend beyond 2 domains and allows access to other trusted domains within a forest. So an example, here's one domain, here's another domain, and if we set up a trust, it's going to be 2-way. That's transitive. So there's also a transitive and intransitive verb. But, intransitive trust is a one-way trust. So the reason for this example is just to kind of show a diagram that, I kind of got from computers. With God, it's transitive trust. When somebody gets saved and they're brought into the kingdom, and, they come in as a child and we're teaching them, to grow in the Lord and become, stronger in that. One of the things off the bat is our, the faith, the belief system, the ideal of, what we don't see. And then, eventually we're going to migrate to trust being an actual thing, a verb. With God, it's the 2-way trust, not the 1-way trust. That being the whole purpose of that example. And this was, clearly from some situations I was having with computers. But then, I kind of looked at, the reasons for the lack of trust. It's really I don't know, going on some different paths, and me realizing, that trust was the next step, beyond the faith. I kind of sometimes, and always can be tweaked. I'm not saying it's perfect, but you get a belief system, you get an ideal, you get rolling in that, you see the evidence that God has. We're being taught all kinds of different, things that are all under that umbrella. But then, for me personally, it was getting out of that bubble and actually trusting God. Then it was like, what does that mean? Kind of like with my wife, when we first got married, it was all a faith system. I mean, maybe there was some trust in areas, but, I really look at it kind of like that. After years and years of faith, we started to build trust, which was actionable things, not just talking about I love you, but actually doing things to show that I love you. So one of my problems, which this could be all explored, all of this is not just one relative thing. There's many pieces to this. But one of those things is laziness. I have a big problem with that in different levels. And I recognized, how can I trust God more in this? It was my laziness that was preventing me from trusting God more. The definition of laziness, the quality of being unwilling to work or use energy, idleness. So, maybe thinking about all kinds of things, but not actually putting them to action was a form of laziness. I was idle, although might have been thinking of all kinds of great ideas. But it was the lack of trust, putting it into action, is where I started to see, some issues. Another big one, acceptance. So I got faith in God. I got, things kind of tidied there, and that grows because it always does. But then you come out of that and it's like, okay, I'm going to this really important meeting. I'm over here thinking about all kinds of things that God's going to do or what could go wrong or, different things that, I had to step out and actually trust and accept whatever was going to come out of this meeting. I was going to accept it. So then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of stuff went away. It was like, and you get pulled back over there and you're like, no, wait, I'm going to trust God and accept whatever it is. So now, that helped clear some, thinking power there, some processing power. Acceptance is defined as the action of consenting to receive or undertake something. Action of consenting to, I don't think. The action of consenting to receive or undertake something offered. So, going into a really important meeting and sitting down and just accepting what this conversation was going to be about, accepting whatever the result was really hard, and then leaving that meeting accepting the results was even harder, but I kept going back to I'm just accepting what it is and, moving forward from that point instead of, getting sucked into the trap of, all kinds of, different reasons. I can relate this, a lot to my younger days in my life. I had a big drinking problem for a few years, and I realized, that big drinking problem was because I was trying to be accepted. I was trying to be accepted into something. I was kind of the weirdo drunk guy over here, realizing that, that lack of acceptance, some of my failures in life was because of the lack of acceptance. Another thing, This one's a big one for me. Patience. Failure of patience. So you go into a meeting, I'm going to accept the results, and then you gotta wait. So the definition of patience, the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. I know I don't always have patience. I know that. And, collectively I'm seeing, reasons why my anger is the way it is. I'm not accepting. I'm angry because I don't want to accept what it is. I'm angry because I want to be lazy. I'm just saying. I'd much rather go, we grow a garden and all these things are happening. I would much rather go sit on the couch and watch TV. I really would. But it's that, that's that acceptance of, okay, you have a garden, you have to take care of it. So you have to put action into doing that to get the results. We could discuss how good the garden might end up and discuss all these things that could happen if we don't plant a garden, but actually doing it and seeing what would happen, it wasn't a complete failure. But even if it was, accepting it and learning what the failure was another very important part of it. Another one, mindset, is defined as the established set of attitudes held by someone. This mindset, and I have verses to back this stuff up, and we are getting close to out of time, so, but I'll just do.
Dan, if you don't have enough time and you want to carry on next week, that's fine.
Oh, I'm almost done with the letter, but if we get enough time here, there's a few verses. But that mindset is obedience, but, the biggest one is renewing of your mind in Romans, So that mindset, that's a tough one because it requires everyday work. This needs to be part of the everyday routine. I'm a guy of habit very badly, and I go to work and you get in the routine. You get up in the morning, you get in the routine. And then over time, I got a routine and it's been 6 years, and you got to evolve the routine to fit some of these items in. And a lot of it can be related like 4 steps forward and 2 steps back. I've come to realize that is going to be life. Now, not maybe so, extravagant as some other people, or, this group of people might be different than this group of people, but it in some respects, it is, 4 steps forward and 2 steps back. So, to conclude this, is examples. Just to start a little simple, I had 2 chickens. We were hatching chickens, and I had 2 chickens that were 2 eggs that had hatched, and the chickens were doing very well. They had hatched in the incubator. Okay, so we had put some eggs out under the hen, and then the hen kind of gave up, so we got an incubator. We moved those eggs to the incubator. So then, you're just waiting on the incubator to do its thing, and you no longer have to worry about the hens not doing their job. And so, two chicks hatched in the incubator, and I think what happened was I got pretty excited about it. And so, went out, attended to these chicks, and so it was morning time, and it was kind of coolish outside, but I thought, I'm just going to go stick these with the hens, and then everything will be okay. And so then, I did that, and then it was a Saturday, so we were doing other things, and it had been about 2 hours, and all of a sudden, this thing in my brain came up and said, go check these chicks. And I'm like, You know, I don't remember what I was doing, but it was just like, why am I getting why? So I go out and I check these two chicks out. And I mean, they're literally laid out on the ground, like pretty much, I thought they were dead. It was just like, they, you know, so I took them and I, you know, of course went to Penny and, well, we ended up putting them back in the incubator. And then I think I had to go somewhere or something, so, you know, I was going to check them back in there. The whole time I was worried about these chicks. But you know, there was something that just said, you know, well, pray for them. And you know, these are just chickens. Nobody, you know, they're just chickens. Nobody cares about chickens, right? These are going to live and die, and that's how that life works, right? We got plenty of other chicks who are going to get. I thought, man, I put all this work into it. And I thought, why not? So it was just simple. You know, take care of these chicks, hope they live, amen. You know, just a simple thing. You know, and the rest of the day I kind of didn't think about it. But I got home, and those chicks were very alive.
Oh.
They were very alive, moving around, and, you know, it was pretty cool to see those chicks live.
Yeah.
And they were underneath there, and they were good to go. So, you thought I would have learned from that, right? So we had another chick. And that chick hatched, and, you know, I actually helped it hatch. And then I thought, I shouldn't have done that. So I take this chick inside, and I tell Penny about it, and, you know, I was blowing on it in my hand. We didn't have an incubator. We took it in, we put a hair dryer on it, and then we rolled it up in a blanket and put it, you know, in her, you know, under her arm, and was just trying to warm this chick up. And Penny, you know, brings the chick in a little later. It's like, I don't know about this chick. I don't know. And so we did it again. We prayed about this chick. We just said, you know, and Penny prayed about it. It was real simple. That was it. So it wasn't long later that we decided, let's just go put it back out. I don't think we had the incubator. We didn't have the incubator yet. So we were just going to go put it back outside. And the next day, that chick is like, it's the most active chick. It's a different chick than the others, so it's bigger and it looks like a little T-Rex. And now when I go out there, or a velociraptor, but now when I go out there, this chick will come right up to me, and of course, you know, I feed it all kinds of food. But that just being a simple example. Another, just to quickly try to wrap this up, another example, Penny left work, or left homeschool one day from here, and she was terribly sick. And I know this was a collective thing. This was not just me, but this is my perspective. I come pick Penny up, and I took her home, and basically got her upstairs and got her to, or no, she slept in Steve's bed, but got her to lay down. So I went outside. I was like, man, you know, I was kind of worried about her. She had all kinds of, like, her head was hurting and it was burning and just all kinds of weird things. And I don't know, you know, I go outside, of course, I don't know what to do, and, you know, all these things. Well, I was walking across the yard, and all of a sudden it hit me. Just pray for her. So, you know, it was simple. Like, God, just take care of Penny. Amen. And then I continued. So 5 minutes later, I go into the house, and I walk into the bedroom, and I say, so how are you doing? Oh, all the pain's gone? She got right up out of bed. She got up, and I'm like, well, that's awesome. I was like, you know what happened to me? And I told her, and it's like, she got up, and like the rest of that day, to that point, actually, it's all gone. Every bit of it. Like, whoa! There's evidence! You know, there's evidence. Another example, this chair. You know, we can talk about this chair all day long. The faith in this chair. You know, and you know, until you actually sit down in the chair, once you sit in the chair, realizing, oh, I can trust this chair. But if you never sit in the chair, you'll never know if you can trust the chair. Another quick example, Niagara Falls, back in 1859. I like this story. A guy named Charles Blondin set up a tightrope 160 feet across the Niagara Falls. There was believed to be 25,000 to 50,000 spectators, and this stretch was a quarter mile. Yeah. So he tight-roped across, and then he started doing other things. He tight-roped across with a sack on. He tight-roped with stilts. He carried a stove. He rode a bicycle. And I think this story's true. It's all over Google, but I wasn't there, so to me, it's like, why would you do all this crazy stuff? He cooked an omelet going across it. Then in July 15th, 1859, he walked across it backwards and then returned pushing a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
And it was like, then, of course, the crowd was amazed, and they're, going crazy over this, and I probably would too.
Well, what, you rode in the wheelbarrow? I think I heard something about.
Yeah, the guy, there is a guy that.
Oh.
There is a guy that does do that, but after he pushed the wheelbarrow over, he then he did it blindfolded.
Oh my God.
And then after all of that, he asked if anybody wanted to ride in the wheelbarrow, and of course everybody's cheering and like talking, then nobody wanted to do it. But later on, he had a manager named Henry something, and he ended up getting talked into riding in the wheelbarrow, and so then he actually did it. But the whole demonstration, you do a bunch of research on it, is demonstrating the faith versus the trust. The faith of being in the crowd and seeing it all happen, and we believe you and all this, but then the guy asking, a step further, do you want to ride in the wheelbarrow? Because now we have to put action into it, accepting what might happen out of this. But anyway, that was a really good story to come across. One last thing, I'm done. One day I was having some work issues, and this is where God really revealed this to me and set this going in motion. This was a few months ago. Had a lot of work issues, a lot of different things changing in the industry, and it could lead me out of a job. That's how bad it is. So accepting that has taken a very long time, and I haven't totally fully accepted it. But one day there was a lot of issues, and I had to go. I had to go somewhere, and it was to go up north to a place where I went duck hunting, and they had a little dock, and so I drove out there. I got out there. What am I doing here? It was just essentially to get away from all the noise that has been happening and try to really figure this thing out. So I went out there. Walked out on the dock, the water was all frozen. It wasn't real cold, but it was cold enough. And I got out on that dock and I just leaned on the dock and was just, just daydreaming. And then all of a sudden, here come two coyotes come over the hill and come and run down into the parking lot. They were from here to that window from me. And they stopped. And of course, I'm on this dock, and I'm kind of freaking out a little because you get around any stray animal, the consequences can be really bad. These could be rabid coyotes that could attack me. There's all kinds of reasoning here. So I'm even thinking I'm going to get up on this rail and hold this pipe if I have to. I'm just thinking things out because I'm not going to jump in the frozen lake. There's no way that's happening. Then I realize I have no knife, I have no gun, I have nothing in my person. And, they were between me and the entrance, basically. So if I try to go out the entrance, they're right there. So I froze. Like, okay, let's just, maybe they won't smell me. And, the two coyotes come down and they were actually fighting. And then there was another coyote that come around and went around the other side of my truck. And, this whole time I was just like, what am I going to do? But all of a sudden it was obviously God, but it was like, wait, I got faith in this. I got faith in what's going to... And then it really quickly translated, it was not faith. It was, do you trust me? Like, whoa, now we just went up another level, right? Like, there's coyotes over here that can easily smell me, and I don't think they're going to come on the dock, but I'm telling you, when you're in that mindset, like, what's going to happen, you don't think clearly, altogether sometimes, But it was a trust thing, and, like, trust what's going to happen. So I just, like, immediately froze, like, I don't know how you want me to trust you here, but, because I'm thinking of running, I'm thinking of going up this pipe, I'm thinking of all these things. But eventually it was sit and wait, and like 5 minutes later, I started to realize the cool view of it. I started like, oh, I've never been this close to coyotes, and they're just playing, and they're just like my dog at home. They're just playing and having all kinds of fun, and I'm starting to like, let's call them, let's, but I did. After, standing there and just trusting what was going to happen, the coyotes left.
Yeah.
And it was like they didn't even see me there. They did not look at me. They did not, like they weren't sniffing around. It was like these two were fighting, and here was this one on the outside just looking for food. And I'm like, I'm over here. You guys can smell better than me. Yeah, I know you can smell me. But that was true evidence for me, that, stepping into that trust, and, when the noise happens and the things are happening, it really goes back to just trust God. And it's like me, I'm a lot of times a person of action when I'm not lazy, but, I always want to act on that. And sometimes it's the patience to find out when to act. Or it could be an act thing now. I mean, there's a lot of verbs, right? But anyway, that is my lesson.
Awesome. That's good, Danny. Good.
Hey, Danny, you were talking about your chicken episode. There was a teacher that was doing some yeast and an incubator. She was so into it that her daughter lived in Iowa, so she loaded up all these yeast things, 4 of them, and took them to Iowa so that she could keep them warm and stuff. And now they're like they call it.
Yeah. Yes. We got 8 baby chicks.
Danny,
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna construct a sentence there. What happened to that?
I was, but
Oh.
they talked it out. I was going to write one of the verses out, and then obviously I didn't